Thank you all for coming and signing up for this. I hope you won't be disappointed. Let me tell you why there is a Middle East Institute in Singapore and what we do before I go into the substance. By the way, I don't intend this to be a lecture or a monologue. I will say some introductory, make some introductory remarks, and then let's have a dialogue. Because you can help us improve this course. And I'll meet those of you who are foolhardy or hardy enough to stay the course at the end of the course and talk to you all again. Now, I have an interest in the Middle East, but I am by no means a Middle East expert. The real Middle East expert in this room is sitting over there. But about 12 years, more than 12 years ago, because when I was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our then Prime Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, had an insight that we should have had as a government a long time ago. And that insight is that even if we did our best to ignore the Middle East would not ignore us. So we better learn more about it. And since it's a complicated region, whatever the government did by itself would probably be not enough. You needed some source of independent assessment. We are not a think tank in the sense that we do policy research. We don't make policy recommendations because our researchers are mainly academics and they wouldn't know what a policy looks like, actually, frankly. But they know a lot about the Middle East, and we write papers that give another perspective that helps the policymakers, well, gives them more data to hopefully come up with something sensible. Well, I said that we spent a lot of time, that we didn't have this insight that although we tried to ignore the Middle East will not ignore us. I meant it literally. When I first joined the Foreign Ministry, coming 40 years ago, I'm retired now, several times. I like retirement so much that I didn't do it just once, I did it twice. My first job was desk officer for the Middle East. I held that august position for 40 minutes. And then our then permanent secretary, who subsequently became our president, Mr. S.R. Nathan, the late Mr. Nathan, heard about it and was reported to me, said, "Give the boy a proper job." So I went somewhere else. Okay. And that was pretty much our attitude, frankly. We had two missions in the Middle East, one in Cairo. And the reason we had it in Cairo is because, you know, Singapore's political history, we didn't expect to be independent, we didn't want to be independent, but we had independence thrust upon us. And suddenly had to gain recognition from the widest possible spectrum of countries. And Egypt was then a leading light in what was then a much more serious movement called the non-aligned movement. Right? And then we had a consulate in Jeddah because 16%, 17% of our population is Muslim and they go on the Hajj. And that was about it. We were even then an oil refining center, but the oil is brought here by the oil majors. So we didn't really have to bother. What happened? We went from this indifferent attitude to fairly widespread engagement of the Middle East. Apart from the two missions I mentioned, we have an embassy in Riyadh now. We have a consul general in Dubai. We have an embassy in Abu Dhabi. We have a consul general in Muscat. We have an embassy in Doha. And we have non-resident ambassadors to almost all the Middle East countries, except, let me see, Libya, Syria, and Iraq. Whether you want to consider Afghanistan a Middle East country or not is a debatable matter, but we don't have anything there for the obvious reason, at least when I was the permanent secretary, I couldn't find anybody I disliked enough to send there. You know? Okay. There are three reasons why our attitudes change. Right? First, ideology. We realize that, first of all, the trigger, the proximate cause, was when we discovered an Al Qaeda linked organization in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, Jemaah Islamiyah. So that was a direct link. We have the goal of having establishing a caliphate in Southeast Asia. Singapore is irrelevant. We were expected to disappear once the caliphate was established, but they were planning quite seriously terror attacks in Singapore. Fortunately, we discovered in time, we broke the organization. But we cannot break the ideology. How do you destroy an idea? You can't, really. So it's there. So it went from being, and terror is still an issue. We still have, even in Singapore, not an absolutely large number, but a steady number of people inspired by ideologies coming from the Middle East who think it's a jolly good idea to go off and join Daesh, ISIL. And you have it in Southeast Asia, generally there. And in fact, as the ground presence in the Middle East of the Islamic State has been destroyed, and you heard the Syrians had just crushed the last physical holding. But the idea is still there. They attacked in Afghanistan, they're still active in Iraq, and so on. And they were active not so long ago in southern Philippines, and they're still there. You can't destroy an idea. All the people we have caught in Singapore are self-radicalized. That means they're not part of an organization. But they watch some YouTube, they are influenced by something, and they decide one day something snaps in their mind and decide it's a good idea to go and join this. And this is actually, in a way, harder to deal with than the kind of JI organization that we broke up. Because an organization is an organization. It has a structure, which in principle, at least, you can penetrate, you can break, you can get intelligence, you can break it. But these are people, almost everyone, self-radicalized. And how do you know what's going on in somebody's mind? And we are very fortunate because almost everybody that we have caught, in fact, everybody that we have caught, except the few that slipped away and are somewhere out there, were turned in either by their religious leader or their family, who realized that something was wrong. And we are lucky because the Muslim community, unlike, let's say, in some Western countries, has some trust in the government. And that's why they turn in these people, because they realize these people are, the biggest threat of these people pose is to the Muslim community. It's not a strategic threat. It cannot be an existential threat in the sense that they cannot win. They cannot establish a caliphate. There's no way. But they can cause a lot of mayhem along the way. But beyond this direct terror threat, and the terror ideologies, it became clear to us around the same time when we discovered and broke up JI, that the way Islam was traditionally conceptualized and practiced in Southeast Asia was changing profoundly under the influence of Middle Eastern variants of Islam. Loosely speaking, and say it's Wahhabism. Right? And okay, there's nothing wrong. You choose to practice your religion in any way you choose. But the problem with this particular thing, it was much more inward looking. It sought to almost separate the Muslim community from the broader communities in which they are embedded. Not just in Singapore, because every Southeast Asian country is pluralistic. And traditional Islam in Southeast Asia had recognized this. It was open, it's highly Sufist, it was syncretic, incorporated elements of older or different beliefs, but that has changed. I don't think you can reverse this because it's not just a simple matter of some Saudi NGO or Kuwaiti NGO coming here with bags of money and spreading, and financing madrasas or mosques or something. Because we don't allow this in Singapore, and yet you do have the phenomenon. Not as severely as in, say, Malaysia, or even in Indonesia, where it's harder to spot because it's much more Until recently, it was harder to spot because it's much a vaster country, but it's there. And so we have to better understand it in order to deal with it. Not to tell people how to, not to tell people how to practice their own religion, but to try to temper its harder edges, try to get, there are many understandings of Islam, there's not only one understanding. Some of you who are Singaporeans must have watched PM's National Day rally speech where he did mention we are going to start Singapore Islamic College, right? And that's really the background to this. And it's not just Muslims, by the way. Certain variants of, I would call radical evangelical Christianity are also heavily influenced by the Middle East, or what happens in the Middle East. Give you one example. I can't go into too much detail because the police are investigating. One of our researchers, who is an international lawyer, has received email threats from groups purportedly evangelical who objected to him studying, or objected to his conclusion that the Trump administration's recognition of Jerusalem is questionable, to say the least, under international law. And they sent him threats. And the threats can be traced to public computers not so far from here. Okay. So it's not, so Middle East does have an influence on identity, not just Muslim identity, Singapore identity. And this is as serious a threat as the direct threat of terror. In fact, arguably, I would argue it's probably a more serious threat because Singapore's common identity is only 54 years old. And we live in an age where identities of various kinds, not just religious identities, ethnic identities, secular identities, are being asserted throughout the world. And it would be foolish to think that we are somehow magically exempt from these trends. I think one of the reasons for this is that most Singaporeans are not particularly interested in international relations, not particularly interested in the Middle East, and insofar as they're interested, have rather simple views of the Middle East. It's a very complicated region. Nothing is simple. The second reason is economics. Our first reason for taking a closer interest in the Middle East was essentially defensive. Things from there are influencing us and countries around us in ways that were not always we thought not very healthy, so better understand. That's essentially defensive. But as we began to engage the Middle East more deeply, and former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong took the lead in this, we discovered that there were positive interests too, mainly economic. That while we had been ignoring, in particular, the Gulf states, they had not been ignoring us. They had been studying our experience very carefully to see what lessons they could possibly take for their own economic development. And that created some opportunity for some of our businesses who have taken advantage of it. But there's another aspect which is again defensive. You all must have know that the US and Iran are in a confrontation in the Gulf. There have been attacks on tankers and so on. And this is going to be a long-term thing because I think the consensus or opinion among most people is that neither Iran nor the US wants a war. But neither is going to give up, so this is going to be very, very prolonged, which means that uncertainty in the Gulf, and that Straits of Hormuz is where most of the oil that comes to our part of the world and further north comes from. And there is an immediate knock-on effect, higher insurance rates, and eventually maybe higher oil price, which will translate immediately into electricity price, and things like that. Now, this geopolitical factor, US-Iran confrontation, which is Saudi Arabia, UAE confrontation with Iran and Qatar, obviously is not very helpful to a world economy that is already very fragile and made more fragile as we speak by the US-China trade tensions. So it's another factor. There's a positive factor, there's a negative factor. And even in this negativity, there's some opportunity because there are let's say there are Middle Easterners and Central Asians. This institute also studies Central Asia, who are very interested in Singapore's wealth management capabilities, and there's opportunity there. And I think some of our financial institutions do recognize it, but they are rather nervous because they don't know very much about the Middle East. I'll tell you a story. Just 2 days ago, CEO of a bank, a friend of mine who works for this bank, asked me, said the CEO heard of you, wants to talk to you. And because they're very interested in doing wealth management in some Middle East, Central Asian countries, and there was demand there. I mean, it's not that they went looking, people came looking for them, but they were very nervous. They were very nervous because they knew nothing about these things. They were very nervous whether they could abide by compliance rules and things like that. But I told them, look, you're only nervous. In this respect, it's no different, say, from China or Indonesia, right? You can work there, you can work here. The only reason is I can see is that you know something about China and Indonesia, you know nothing about these countries. So there are still, in this fragile world economy, some opportunities. And the third reason is, of course, geopolitics. It seems far away, but some of the geopolitical developments in the Middle East do have an almost direct bearing on geopolitical developments in our region. This US-Iran confrontation, which I just mentioned, is one symptom, a kind of proxy for a broader strategic realignment that is going on even as we speak. Is the US in retreat? I don't think the US is in retreat if you take the word literally. But the US certainly has a new attitude, because the period when the US was the sole and preeminent global power and regional power was historically a very short and exceptional period, maybe from 1991 to something like 2009. More normally, the world is divided between competing major powers. More normally, the region, including our region, has been divided, and we are returning to this period of normalcy, and it's not the same US. Mr. Trump is a symptom of something larger. So things that happen in the Middle East are, in a sense, a proxy for things that will affect us sooner or later. Give you a couple of examples. Mr. Obama drew a red line in Syria over the use of chemical weapons and failed to enforce it. That immediately degraded American credibility in this part of the world that relies on American military presence as one of the foundations of stability in this part of the world. Because if you are a great power and you say you're going to do something, you better do it. Because if not, your credibility will be degraded. Conversely, when Mr. Trump, while having dinner with Mr. Xi Jinping, decided to bomb Syria over the same issue, chemical weapons, he did quite a lot to restore credibility. And that's important for an issue that's of immediate relevance to our region. That's North Korean issue. I think there's no doubt that the American deterrence of North Korea degraded significantly under the Obama administration, because he did nothing, basically. He talked a good talk, he made very nice speeches, but essentially he did nothing. But then when Mr. Trump, in Syria, and through his rhetoric, demonstrated that he was willing to use force, I think it did a lot to restore credibility. And it's not a guess of mine. During the 8 years of the Obama administration, that is when the long-range North Korean missile program and their nuclear program really took off. And they're not stoppable now. If they're not stoppable, how you deal with a nuclear power? They are a nuclear power. You can only deal with nuclear power one way, through deterrence. Right? And Mr. Trump's restoration of the credibility of American deterrence is very important. And it works, I tell you why. Kim Jong-un has been cleverer than anybody thinks. But he also gets carried away. And he got carried away when he threatened to bracket Guam with their long-range missiles. And Mr. Trump threatened fire and fury on him. And ever since then, he did not stop long-range missile testing immediately, but he tested on a very high trajectory that went nowhere near Guam or any American possession. And even to today, he has only tested short-range missiles. So there is some, and I don't think he would have done that unless he believed Mr. Trump. And one of the reasons, I'm not saying the only reason, is Mr. Trump's willingness to use force against Syria over an issue where Obama said he would and didn't. The nuclear deal, the JCPOA, that's a positive example. I'll give you a negative example. When Trump unilaterally canceled the JCPOA or pulled the Americans out, now look, Singapore is not directly involved in this issue. We can't be. We're not there. We don't have the expertise to be involved. But what was the issue for us when he unilaterally pulled himself out of the JCPOA? The issue is sanctity of international agreements. It's a very fundamental principle of what little order there is in the international things, that agreements signed once must be honored. It doesn't matter if it's signed by this government, I don't like this government, I inherited it, I have to honor it. If I don't like the agreement, I renegotiate it. I don't just unilaterally discard it. And that also says something in a negative way about the credibility of American commitments. Now, I could go on, but I told you I don't want to have a monologue. So these are among some of the reasons, broadly, why we should be interested in the Middle East. I mean, not that all of us are going to become Middle East experts, but we should at least take an intelligent interest in it because it does affect our lives. It affects our lives in terms of social cohesion. It affects our lives in terms of our livelihood, economics, and it affects our lives in terms of the broader strategic picture, which we cannot divorce ourselves from. Okay, I'll stop here. Any questions? Any comments? Yeah. Can you just identify yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mansur Mohdi. I'm a banker here in Singapore. Thank you.
No, it wasn't his bank I was talking about.
Well, it wasn't my bank. So firstly, thanks very much for the comments. I was interested when you were speaking, you mentioned Central Asia a little bit in your comments. I'm not very familiar with what the program is going to be, but I suspect it will, as you say, it will focus very much on the Middle East as we traditionally define it. But does it actually make sense to include more of a focus as well on Central Asia? The reason why I say, a few reasons why I say this. Firstly, I've met more and more Singaporeans who travel to that part of the world. So today I went to GIC to give a presentation. One of the portfolio managers, he said, I've just come back from holiday. I said, where have you been? She said, she went to Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's my wife is from Kyrgyzstan.
Okay.
And so we know lots of people in this part of the world who go to Central Asia. And professionally, I went last year to Kazakhstan to see the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I have to say, people in Central Asia are very, very interested in Singapore.
Yes, I know that.
But the third thing, the reason why I think maybe we should include it in the future, the focus here is that the connections to the Middle East and Central Asia are becoming much more intense, both good and bad. I see that from all my travels. So I don't know what you think. If the Middle East is already a very, very diverse region and lots of countries to cover, but does it make sense to actually link?
No, it is part of our remit. And you are looking at one of those Singaporeans who have traveled a lot in Central Asia, particularly since I retired. And you are right in the sense that these divisions between the Middle East, South Asia, Central Asia, they are all rather artificial. But it's a question of not recognizing these links. It's a question of capacity for us, of prioritization, because we can't possibly do everything at once. But that interest is there, and there is interest of Central Asians in this part of the world. Beginning of this year in February, I brought a group of about 20 young Central Asians to Singapore. I got some money for briefings on ASEAN, because as you probably know, maybe the rest don't know, Central Asians are generally beginning to find themselves, each other. It's a very slow process. It's still early, and it's not irreversible yet, but the will is there. The will is there, and they are looking for models. And I met many of these young people, and they asked me when I was traveling there. They're looking for models. They decided the EU model. Well, the EU model is not in good shape for the EU itself, and it's probably too complicated for their stage of regional cooperation. They were looking all over the place, and they stumbled upon ASEAN, which is a looser model of regional cooperation, basically to try and define the region for yourself rather than let other external major powers define it for you, which is pretty much the fate of Central Asia for a long time, right? So what you said, I absolutely agree, but it's a capacity problem. So what we do on Central Asia would be, I guess, now and then I can find money to do what I did, bring these guys here for a week for briefings. They met some of our former foreign ministers, not just from Singapore, from Indonesia, from Thailand. I brought them here too. I met them, they had briefings. And, we told them, look, this is our model. You go and decide which bits you think might be able to work, right? We can do sort of this thing, but this is kind of sporadic and episodic and opportunistic. If I know of somebody from Central Asia coming here, we will certainly try to invite him to give a talk, do a seminar, if he's that way inclined. But we don't have the capability and the capacity right now to have a sustained focus on Central Asia. But it's not because we don't recognize what you said. Oh, hello.
Hello. Thank you. Ambassador Bilahari.
Can you identify yourself? I know who you are.
Sorry, I'm Caroline. I'm Caroline, and I bring my troopers to the Gulf.
Yeah.
When you speak of developments in the Middle East, which part of the Middle East are you really interested in, or Singapore is really interested in? And should Singapore strategically care for certain parts against other parts of the Middle East? Because it's wide, it's very diverse. Where's our interest?
Well, if what you are asking is the Middle East is in a more than usual state of division right now, if you're asking which side of the divide should we place ourselves, the simple answer is neither side, our own side. And that's true. Well, foreign policy is about national interest, right? Sometimes, okay, I just came out of a meeting with a senior Bahraini. He said what I expected him to say. I guess no surprises, what he told us. But I told him quite frankly, look, I personally have always been very puzzled about Qatar walking a tightrope, the ends of which are held by somebody else. So it's only a matter of time they fall. However, when they fell, that kind of response Singapore cannot support. How can you, just because you're bigger and you don't like what I do, blockade me, right? So I said, I can see the merit of your argument, and substantially I agree with it, but I absolutely cannot agree with your response. And your response to me doesn't seem to be working either. As I was in Doha December, things go on. In fact, the port is doing better because the Dubai port can't be used to ship things there. Oman ports are doing better because they have been quite neutral in this. So whatever the geopolitical conflict, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's US, China, we have to understand our own interests and pursue them. Sometimes we may have to tilt this way, sometimes we may have to tilt that way, and sometimes we may have to cheese off both sides. But it has to be always based on our interests. But if you are asking in terms of prioritization, as I said, again, we can't do everything at once. We have a very long-standing relationship with Israel. Israel is the only country that helped us start the armed force when we were kicked out of Malaysia. We asked almost everybody else, We asked the Brits, of course. We asked the Australians. We asked the New Zealanders. We asked the Indians. We asked the Egyptians. All turned us down. And it was not unreasonable for them to turn us down because who thought we would survive? Right? So that was but Israel helped us, and that's the beginning. So that's one thing that we are interested in. The other is, of course, Iran. It's a big country. It cannot be isolated forever. It's not possible. It's a civilization. And how do you isolate a civilization? And the time frame of civilizations is very different. 10 years, 20 years, what's that? Twinkling of an eyelid. So we are interested in Iran. And of course, we are interested in Egypt because you cannot be interested in the Middle East without being interested in Egypt. Because whatever happens in Egypt, for good or ill, will have a broader impact. And there are many Singapore students studying at, say, Al-Azhar, right? Then the Gulf, of course, because that's where the action is right now, both geopolitical and economic. We must hope that Mohammed bin Salman succeeds in his reforms, both economic and social and religious. But whether he succeeds or he fails, they will have a great impact. And through the three modalities, and particularly the modality of ideology, will have an impact in Southeast Asia and us. So those are roughly our priorities. If you ask me personally, the place I like best is Oman. It's a great place. That's the only place I take my family for holiday. In the Middle East. In the mountains in particular. Jabal Akhtar, very nice, beautiful resort. But go in winter, don't go in summer, right? Go in December, January, February. More questions? Yeah, James?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the Caroline's question.
Yeah.
I thought you would have included Turkey.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about Turkey. Good, thanks for reminding me. Turkey, because, okay, it's not doing great now under Erdogan, but it's a big country. It has a great influence in Central Asia. One time we had hoped that Turkey could be a gateway for us into Central Asia because our businesses know very little about that place. Things like GIC, Temasek have some investments in, say, Kazakhstan, but they are portfolio investments, right? And you just look at numbers, if the numbers look right. Actually, you should not just look at numbers, but they think they can only look at numbers. Okay, that's not my, all right, that's not my business, right? They're beginning to realize that a bit, I think. But Turkey, yeah, thanks for reminding me, James. It's not doing well now, but again, it's a big country, civilizational too, has an influence throughout Central Asia. And, this can't go on forever. So we have, I forgot in the list of embassies, we have an embassy in Ankara. No, somewhere behind there.
Earlier you mentioned.
Sorry, who are you?
Oh, sorry. Paul Freeland. I'm a grad student at the LKY school.
Okay.
Earlier you mentioned that they're having to be cognizant of Singapore's the capacity and the ability to uphold its interests.
Well, this institute's capacity.
All right. What I'm wondering is, so given that,
Yeah.
as Singapore looks out at the Middle East, what can Singapore do to exert its interests in the Middle East? What sort of what sort of tools does it have at its disposal to help guide things in that direction?
Well, we have close relationships at different levels, at the state-to-state level, not just diplomatic relationships, but intelligence sharing relationships. Because they are as concerned about things happening here, going back, things move both ways, and not only good things. Our businesses are, to my mind, still a little timid because it's unfamiliar. That story about the bank I told you, right? Some of the things they're worried about, I said the same things apply to China, to India, to Indonesia, to almost every damn country. But the reason you're not so nervous about these countries, you know more. And what's the solution? Get to know more about these countries. How do you get to know more about these countries? Go there more often. Have a look, right? So those are the normal tools. And they are interested, at least some of the Gulf states, in our economic model. I don't think every aspect is applicable. But if the very interest gives us some influence, as well as economic opportunity. And finally, we have the usual embassies, to try to influence in the same. Now, I'm not saying we're ever going to be a big player in the Middle East. We can't be, right? We can't be because, and we don't really want to be a big player. We just want to be enough of a player to look after our interests in the way I have kind of broadly outlined them, the three areas. And I think that we can do. We could probably do it better, but we need in the government as well as in the track 2, like this institute, to better build up capacity. Right now, most of our researchers are foreigners, but we have hired some young Singaporeans as research assistants. I mean, the fact that they apply for the job shows that they have an interest. They have no training in the Middle East, but if you apply for a job in the Middle East Institute, rather than say East Asia Institute, Southeast Asia, obviously by definition you must have some interest, right? So we can try them out, and I found a couple of Singaporeans in my travels who are pursuing higher degrees on their own buck, or maybe their parents' buck, probably more likely. I know a Singaporean who's about to finish his PhD in Tel Aviv University. I know a young Singaporean, she was a banker for about 5 years, and then one day said, screw that, I'm not interested, and went off to the great chagrin of her parents to go and study at Tel Aviv University, study the Middle East. But okay, these people we want, there are people, right? And I told them, you got a job, come home when you're ready, when you have finished your studies. So we have to build that capacity, expertise. We don't have enough people, for example, in the foreign ministry where I was, who are fluent in Arabic. We have nobody who can speak. We have one or two people who have some knowledge of Turkish, not very deep, as they would be the first to admit, because they only started studying in one case 2 years ago, and then posted to Ankara and continued studying. One is just 1 year, right? We don't have enough people who are good enough to work in Arabic. I mean, not just tell the taxi driver where to go and know whether the taxi driver is scolding you or asking you for directions, not that kind of level. A bit more than that, we don't have enough, right? But these are things that we have to build up. You can't do it like that, right? But we want to build it up, and we will. We are moving in the right direction, perhaps rather slowly, but we got other priorities, right? I mean, the Middle East is important, but it's never going to be important as our own neighborhood. And from what I've told you, you can see the importance of the Middle East derives from our interest in our own neighborhood, broader neighborhood, right? So those are the instruments. No different from any instruments in any other region of the world, but only relatively recently deployed. We started seriously engaging the Middle East only in the 2000s. That's not very, the early 2000s, but that's not very long, 19 years, not very long, to develop all these capabilities. Yeah?
Yes, my name is Lam Chi Chung. I'm with Axiom Asian Investment Management Firm. I also had a comment about the scope of the Middle East Institute.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that I thought it was very good of the Middle East Institute to have a historian as director. I'm not sure whether he's still the director.
No, he's not the director anymore.
But just my more general point is that I think the Middle East is a region that is shaped, by history more than just about any other region. And so while I understand that current affairs should be the focus of the Institute, I think if every now and then you have historians as visiting scholars or coming by to speak to enlighten the audience, that's great. So that was my comment.
I agree with you. I don't think it is possible to understand any region or any country without knowing its history. I mean, you don't have to go back to prehistory, but at least modern history, by which I mean, 18th, 19th century, you at least must know that. Some of these quarrels, like between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, go back a couple of generations, right? So yeah, I agree with you. We are not solely recruiting economists or political scientists or sociologists. If one of the people coming back is a historian, a Singaporean, she is a historian. Yep.
Hi, I'm Herman. I'm a research assistant here.
One of the guys got hired.
So my question is, you talked a lot about the war on terror and how that's an interest to the state, the Singapore state.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you think that Singapore, in focusing a lot on this rhetoric of the war on terror in the interest of social cohesion, do you think that this actually backfires and then this actually creates an air of
First,
suspicion?
you are wrong. In fact, we do not say war on terror. We have never said war on terror. We have always said terrorism is a problem, a serious issue, it will occur. That phrase, war on terror, is a stupid phrase that no government official has ever used in Singapore.
But it's something that's used by the Americans as well. And by,
So what? They can use anything. The Americans say a lot of stupid things.
But
So
no,
what
for
can we do
sure.
about
I
it,
don't.
right?
I don't disagree. Yeah, but I think Singapore has been a very big supporter of this fight against terrorism.
No, let me
right?
tell. Okay, I get you where you're thinking. Let me tell you why we did it. When 9/11 happened, we knew something fundamental had changed in how America would look at the world henceforth. There is nobody in the Singapore government that ever thought invading Iraq was a good idea. But we supported it. Why? Because we need the Americans. And Americans were in a mood of, you're either with me or against me. Right? So we did the minimal we could. We never deployed boots on the ground because it's too dangerous. Why we want Singaporeans to die for something stupid? We sent planes high in the air, refueling planes. We sent ships out at sea, and we did some police training, and things. But that was that was a function of the importance of the relationship with the US, and nothing to do with the war on terror. How is the invasion of Iraq going to solve the problem of terrorism? It has actually exacerbated it. But in Singapore, we never use that phrase, but we do constantly warn our people that a terror attack will happen in Singapore. And the reason we do that is in order to prepare them to maintain social cohesion. We always say, look, a terror attack will happen. The main consideration is this. It's not that every Muslim is a terrorist. There are some misguided or idiotic or whatever other adjective you want to use. Yeah, but social cohesion is always. I don't know whether you meant it, but the implication of what you said is that if you don't talk about it, you'll be fine. No, I don't agree. Maybe if that's not what you implied, then okay, sorry, but we have to talk about it to prepare people. It will happen, sooner or later. However careful we are, however tight our security, we are open society, so it will happen. And because nowadays you're not talking about like the JI plot, I told you, right? That kind of thing is relatively, and I stress relatively, easier to deal with. Easier is not easy, but easier is easier. Because there is a structure, you can penetrate it in principle, you can eavesdrop on conversations, but this all goes on in people's mind. One day somebody may wake up and decide, for whatever misguided ideology, to take a knife, go in the MRT station and stab somebody. How are you gonna prevent that? So you have to, and the likelihood this guy will be doing it, in his own mind at least, in the name of some variant of Islam, right? He's mistaken, he's wrong. So we have to talk about it to prepare people that this will happen, deal with it, and don't tar the entire community with this kind of thing.
But my question was that do you think that this actually backfires and it actually creates suspicion and also increases Islamophobia?
No, I don't think so. I don't think Singaporeans are Islamophobic. They may not know a lot about Islam, that's true. And they may get too much of the information on Islam from the New York Times or the Washington Post, right? But I don't think Singaporeans are intrinsically Islamophobic. And I don't think, in fact, if you don't talk about it, and it happens, then the greater probability is that the reaction will tar everybody with one brush. Why do you ask that question? I don't know, I'm interested. Why did you ask that question? I'm interested.
Oh, I'm just thinking about this topic a lot, the connection between Islamophobia as well as Islamic radicalism. Yeah, just
Well, I
bouncing
think
off ideas.
that connection probably does exist in Europe, in US, but probably exists closer to our home in Myanmar, in Thailand, to some degree in the Philippines, but I don't think it exists here. I'm not saying every Singaporean loves every Muslim, that is against human nature, but I think by and large we do understand that we all have to live together, Anyway, the government takes a lot of trouble. What makes Singapore unique? Why is Singapore unique? Tell me, how old are you? You are in the 20s, I would guess, right?
6.
Okay. Okay, what, as a perspective of 26-year-old Singaporean, makes Singapore unique?
In what sense?
No, in any sense, that what comes to your mind?
Well, I don't think it's ethnic diversity is unique, personally. Because I think that ethnic diversity is also a feature of Malaysia, it's also a feature of Indonesia.
Correct, you're right.
Yeah.
But I tell you what makes us unique. And unique from the North Asia down through Southeast Asia, through South Asia to the Middle East, is that we don't organize ourselves on the basis of ethnic or religious hierarchy. Every other country, from Northeast Asia down, either informally or formally, implicitly or explicitly, organizes itself on ethnic hierarchy. We don't. Now, I'm not saying our multiracialism is perfect. There is no perfection on earth. You want perfection, go to heaven. But even heaven, there is a hierarchy. Yeah, at least in the Christian idea of heaven, there's a hierarchy. There's God, there's Archangel, there's Gabriel, the saints. There's hierarchy. Okay, but if there is perfection, it will be found in heaven. But we are unique in that sense that we organize ourselves horizontally, and I think that is our shared common value. It's a new common value. It's only 54 years old. Therefore, it is probably not deeply rooted enough. That's why we have to keep talking about it, to prepare people. But that's what makes us unique. Just think about it. Japan is a liberal democracy, but it's clearly, in its deep structure, a hierarchy of ethnic Japanese over, Japanese citizens of Korean or Chinese descent, right? China is a communist egalitarian society, but it's far from egalitarian, and it's a hierarchy of Han over non-Han. Just go down the list and think about it. India is now more clearly under Mr. Modi, a hierarchy of Hindu over non-Hindu. Middle East, well, you don't have to talk, it's hierarchy in some countries, say, of Sunni over Shia, in other countries, the other way around. And even in the liberal democracies of the West, some of the right-wing movements are actually trying to assert hierarchy, a white Christian hierarchy over everything. That is the meaning of Mr. Trump. That's the meaning of Brexit even, I would say. That's the meaning of those right-wing movements in continental Europe. This is our unique value proposition. This is what we defend by talking about terrorism. Look, if a bomb goes off in Singapore, somebody gets stabbed. That's a great tragedy. But the physical damage can be repaired. Of course, a death cannot be restored, but people die, right? It's not good, but if property is destroyed, not good, but we can rebuild. If confidence is shaken, yes, even harder, but we can rebuild confidence. But if the social cohesion is broken, you can't put it back together again, That's our greatest worry about terrorism. That's why I said it's not a strategic threat, because what the terrorists want to do, they cannot succeed. Their goal, if you take their goal of having a caliphate, they cannot succeed. It's not possible. But they can do terrible damage, and not just physical damage, but damage to this idea on which Singapore is organized. When Singapore became independent, there was a very strong push internally. You might know this or might not know this, to make Mandarin the official language, because the majority is Chinese, to assert ethnic hierarchy. But it was resisted by the government, and I think it's much more deeply rooted now than it was in 1965. But is it unassailable? I'm not sure. No more? Yeah. Sure, ask several, there's no charge.
So it's more actually a point from one of our other audience members, where he's talking about what
Capacity.
happened Singapore influence the Middle East.
No, we can't influence the Middle East. We don't try.
But you did mention soft power in your...
They give us some influence in the sense that if they are interested in our model.
But it's not just the model of economics. I would say it's the actual, as you say, the way the society has been arranged here.
I don't see any interest in the Middle East there. They may talk about it, but I don't see any real interest. They love their hierarchies and they want to keep it.
Yeah, I think maybe that's it's in the elite. But when you meet just generally people, not just in the Middle East, but around the world, and you say you're from Singapore, it always gets a reaction immediately. Yeah. I think maybe the soft power of this country, anyway, is something that is probably underestimated.
No, I don't think we underestimate it, but I think we know the limits of it. You can't have soft power, you can't have effective soft power unless you have effective hard power first. It's not just a matter of making nice movies and nice music and so on, right? Or even having a nice model, whether a social model or economic model. The hard part of our, say, economic or social model is that it works. If it didn't work, then you can preach, until you choke on your own saliva and nobody will listen. So, but there are limits to that. This is not, we don't seek to play a huge geopolitical role because it's ridiculous. We're not that mad, in the Middle East, right? We just look after our own interests and try to navigate these things best we can. And you can make a few bucks in the process, why not, Yeah, the lady that has your question. Yeah, it's you. Oh, no, you are the, you work for us. But you can still ask a question,
Hi, sorry, I'm an exchange student at NUS, and to go back to the quick topic, I was wondering whether there are any state-level policies to improve social cohesion with the talk about terrorism, other than opening up the conversation?
Well, conversation is the main thing. There's a lot of effort by political leaders at different levels, grassroots leaders, to talk to people all the time. You don't always see it, but it goes on. There's a guy who does it right here, sitting in the front row, right? As a board member of the Middle East Institute. Basically, at the state level, if you say you're going to organize yourself horizontally, you have to walk the talk. That means your policies must it's not just talk. You have to talk to people, explain things to them, but you have to show that your policies are actually horizontal. I said not perfect, but no perfection on earth, right? If you don't do that, you have no credibility. And I think we have done that. And there's a reason of political history why we do that. Right? It's not that we're all saintly, in the government, had this wonderful idea. Singapore was kicked out of Malaysia essentially for this very point. Because we wanted to a Malaysian Malaysia. That means all races are the same level. And we underestimated, I think, at least the first generation political leadership, underestimated the vehemence with which the Malay political elite in Malaysia clung to the idea of Ketuanan Melayu, Malay dominance. Well, and so we had to leave. Now, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew in 1957, in a debate in what was then the Legislative Assembly, because we were not fully independent, we were internally self-governing, did not believe that Singapore could be independent on its own. And he has a statement to the effect, small island nations in 20th century Southeast Asia are a political joke. It was part of his campaign to seek independence not by ourselves, but as part of the larger Federation of Malaysia. It didn't work, right? So having risked for the sake of a political principle, horizontal organization, becoming a political joke, you had to make it work. And to make it work, you have to walk. The walk, not just talk, the talk. And that is the basis, the foundation of what you see around here. It's not supposed to be like this, We should not exist, actually. So in a sense, everything we do is to that end. It's not just special programs. Yeah, sure. You can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Fazlur Rahman. I'm actually a new board member, but just to respond to you, I'm also given another assignment in Singapore to forge social cohesion. It's not just from the government, but I think this is where within the community. And please, we're more than welcome if you are free over the weekend. You can join us to see what we're doing. In fact, tonight I'm having a meeting. The government, although it's initiated by the government, it's called the Interracial Religious Confidence Circle. Basically, it comprises of community leaders and religious leaders within each constituency. So I'm the chairman of one constituency under Speaker of Parliament. So tonight, in fact, I'm having a meeting at the Buddhist temple because I take turns to rotate. So we had the last meeting at the mosque, now at the Buddhist temple. The whole idea is that we want to make each one of us to feel comfortable. Yeah, because if we are living in our own and just interacting within our own, then there could be mistrust. And in today's world, as you can see with social media, there's a lot of mistrust, intolerance, and hatred being spread. So what we're doing now on the ground is to at least to reach out to each other and to forge a better mutual understanding. And just to give you an example, the last Hari Raya Haji, in fact, it appeared in the papers, where it's a prayer for the Muslims, the morning prayer. And it was interesting because during our meeting, because they had to, because of overspill of the congregants, so they had to close the road. And so they had to use the Muslim volunteers as traffic marshal. And here comes our Buddhist group and says, so you Muslim are going to miss your prayer if you are doing the marshalling. So why not we bring our own volunteers to be the marshal so that you Muslim will not miss your prayer? So I say, wonderful. So it's a small effort, but I think this is what we are doing in Singapore to ensure that we go beyond just our comfort zone, truly understand each other. And this is what we're happening now on the ground. And in fact, there are many youth groups doing it, interfaith dialogues, places of worship for them to do their visitation. So please, I mean, I'd be more than happy to welcome you.
Ajay, you want to tell her something? I forgot, I should have told you about the housing policy. Or you want? Okay, let me tell you something about housing policy. More than 80% of our population lives in public housing, HDB. But we try to ensure that each block has more or less the same ethnic proportions as the population at large. Therefore, you are forced to live with people who are different and try at least minimally to understand them so that you can get along. Now, this is certainly a derogation of the free market in property, but it's a very important policy that was in place from the beginning, a state policy. Right? That means you can't sell your flat to anybody. There's a quick check to see that more or less it's going to be diverse. Because social science theory has told you, and I think this is one of the few social science theories that has some validity, if you allow a complete free market, in about 7 steps, it will have ethnic ghettos. And that we don't want. That is, by the way, from your accent, I guess you're a Brit, right? That's how the Brits rule Singapore, you know. That's why you got Little India, you got Chinatown. Even in Chinatown, you had different streets for different dialect groups. You know, I mean, it's a good idea for its time, but it's not ours. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. No. I don't believe that people should be apologizing forever. Nothing to do with you, you know. Anyway, it was a Scotsman, a Raffles lieutenant, you know, who did the town planning. Any more? Yep.
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm a student for NUS. So actually my question is on trying to understand the concept of Arabization of Islam in Southeast Asia that you talk about. So at the risk of generalizing it, am I right to say that if you want to understand why did this process took place today in this part of the world as compared to like maybe 100 years ago, it's more like a function of globalization, and maybe it's because the people enabled with more wealth
can go and travel more.
Yeah, and
I think you're right.
It's a new normal that maybe societies have to learn how to.
No, I think it's a new. I think you're absolutely right. As I said, it's not just a question of some Saudi guy with bags of money going around, right? Because we don't allow foreign money to fund our Muslim organizations in Singapore, and yet you see that phenomenon, but in fairly attenuated form compared to, say, Malaysia or even some parts of Indonesia. And it is part of globalization. So you can't stop it, but you can manage it. You can try to understand it. And you can try to explain why this is not necessarily the best way to organize yourself in a pluralistic society. Yeah, you can't reverse it. I don't think you can reverse it. It's not possible. Yep, behind there.
Hi, I'm Glenn. I'm also a student. So just to, I think, follow on from his question, I think so as part of your introductory remarks, you shared about how the Middle Eastern ideological influence in Singapore in this area, and I think the specific examples you had used was on more of the radicalization elements, JI, etc.
No, that's one aspect, but I said there's an identity issue.
Okay, yeah. So, but I was just wondering, would you mind just sharing more also on what are your thoughts on how this Arabization of Islam is coming to Singapore, and what are its impacts for Singapore society?
Well, I think the impacts are attenuated in Singapore, but if you look at Malaysia, and to some degree Singapore too, and people like Fazia are fighting against it. Traditional Southeast Asian Islam, or Islam as traditionally practiced in Southeast Asia, I should say, was very open. It was syncretic almost. That means, it incorporates bits of Buddhism, Hinduism, and even pre-Buddhist and pre-Hindu beliefs. And I think the fact that Islam came to Southeast Asia by trade, not the sword, has a lot to do with that. Because if you're a trader, you have to get along with people. Whoever has got money, you've got to get along with them, right? But the problem with, as I said, practice any faith any way you want. But the problem with this new strand, or no, it's not a new strand, it's an old strand, right? It's inward looking. It turns Muslim communities inward. It separates them from non-Muslim communities. And that is dangerous. Now, what happens in Singapore is not as severe as what happens in Malaysia, where even the word Allah is only reserved for Muslims, which is, to my mind and to the minds of some of my Arab friends, utterly ridiculous. What else are you going to call God? Right? Allah is God. If they are Christian Arabic, Allah is God. Muslim Arabs of different kinds, Allah is God. Only in Malaysia, Allah is only a Muslim God. Okay, I couldn't resist that too. It's not just that, it's not just the religious identity. For example, in Southeast Asia, I think much more strongly than even in the Middle East, the position you take on Palestine has become part of a Muslim identity. But what is Palestine is a nationalist issue. It's not a religious issue. They are intertwined, yes, but that's a fact, right? So what happens on the Palestinian issue, which frankly, really, except has nothing to do with us. We are not a player, has an impact. That's why when one of my researchers writes a paper saying that and it's not just Muslim, when one of our researchers writes a paper saying that the American recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital is questionable under international law, some evangelical Christians get angry enough to write him threatening emails. And not just that, I have got, in my career, people threaten me every other day, so I don't care, right? And more serious people than these people have threatened me, and I don't care, right? Particularly, I take precautions, but I don't care. But it happens. I gave a lecture some time ago, and the very first question, lady stood up, and I applaud her openness. She identified herself as a faculty member of one of the faculties of this university and said, I'm a Christian and I want to know, is it true that the voting position we take on Palestinian issues in the UN is determined by the fact that we have a Muslim population and our neighbors are Muslim? I said, ma'am, you're absolutely right, and so what? Social cohesion is an issue. This is an issue on which some section of the population have strong feelings. We have enough problems with our neighbors, so why add to them by being contrarian? And in any case, it's right, but we don't take, and I did tell her we don't take, but we do have a good relationship with Israel, and so we will support Palestinian issues with three exceptions, three red lines. We won't support anything that questions the right of Israel to succeed, to exist. We won't support anything that equates Zionism with racism, and we won't support anything that equates Israel's right of self-defense with war crimes. Right? And I said, this is our policy. It's not a secret, I'm not going to get arrested under the OSA for telling you this, because you should know it. And what's wrong with it? She seemed to think there was something wrong. Then she began to tell me something, she began to mumble something about what the Bible says. So I stopped her and I said, the Bible also says, render unto Caesar things that are Caesar's, and unto God things that are God. This is Caesar's business, not God's business. Okay. And she got a bit miffed, she left the room, which is good. No, but you see, this kind of thing, okay, I said there is some strand of radical evangelism called Christian Zionism, right? It's a very cynical theology to my mind, because you're actually supporting Israel in the hope that Israel will be destroyed so that the Messiah will come quicker. How more cynical can you get, right? But okay, never mind. You want to believe? Believe. But when you start start, because of your beliefs, threatening people who don't share your beliefs, that's another issue. And that, police are investigating those threats. And I hope they catch the guy and hang him up by his toenails in front of the NUS. Because it's obviously somebody from NUS. All right. What time are we supposed to finish, actually? Oh, still got time, right? We still got time to spare, but we don't have. I mean, if you don't have questions, you don't have to make them up, you know. Hey, around what time we finish? 6:30. 6:30. Okay, some more time to finish. Any last questions? Yes, ma'am.
Not in my capacity as the Dean's Office personal interest. I had been researching a lot about the region for friends are there as well as I was considering working there. And Saudi Aramco is very hard to find information on.
Yeah.
Any insights or, yeah.
I'll tell you a story, that the banker said we find it very difficult to assess the risks in these countries because they're very opaque. Do you think the reform efforts will make them less opaque? My reply was, my dear friend, the whole purpose of the reform effort is to ensure that opacity endures for as long as possible, not to make it more transparent. So, no, I don't know how you're going to get more information. And by the way, despite the reforms, as a woman, I wouldn't advise you to go and work in Saudi Arabia. Other Gulf states, it's fine. You know what happened to Professor Shi when he went to open that new university? Okay, right? That time I was second perm sec, right? Every other day, once a week at least, the Saudi embassy would ring me and say, we have received death threats against Professor Shi. So I said, well, you tell me. I hope you told somebody in Saudi Arabia. You tell me. I'm sitting here. No, not thing. So I wouldn't do it if I were you. No, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Oman, definitely. Almost everywhere else is fine.
I'm interested in a financial political matter, not so much my own inputting into it. Because
Do you want to work there, is it? Or no?
No, they have the US ties,
Yeah. But it's very hard to get data.
That's right.
No, it's impossible to get data. It is deliberately an opaque system. And even what data you get, the reliability, I don't know.
No, in fact, I think the listing of Aramco, exactly.
Never, exactly.
You know why not? Because they will have to then provide the data.
Disclose.
They don't want to.
Which they can't. How much allocation goes to the royal family?
No, first of all, the distinction between state funds, company funds, and personal funds down there does not exist. These are absolute monarchies. How can they? That's the first thing that came to my mind when I read Aramco want to. So I said, oh, maybe they will give us some. No, of course not. That's why they haven't done it.
But they have issued a prospectus, they issued a bond, and that had actually a lot of information. That's surprising, given as you say.
Yeah.
Well, the other
You don't
thing,
want to give out that information. But they
I don't think they had a choice if they want to issue a bond.
the other thing you can do is, I think it was on Monday, they had their first ever investor call. And if I'm not incorrect, there actually are transcripts of the call.
But what? Do you listen to it?
I listened to parts of it.
Oh, is it suitably informative?
There was some. Look, I think the bottom line is that nobody really thinks the IPO is going to take place.
Yeah.
Nor does anybody think that the Saudis want the IPO to take place. But they need to keep the friction.
The thing rolling around.
Continuous, because otherwise the notion of transparency is not going to be. But you may want to look at that transcript.
Is it a serious investor call?
Yeah.
Because I listened to one from a completely different country, from a different region entirely. That was all bullshit. It's a marketing call. I said, wow, these people are, somebody is taking this seriously and going to make investment decisions on the basis of this kind of data.
Well, yeah, but to answer the questions very quickly,
Yeah.
I think that the fact that there was an investigation.
Okay, that is the signal.
That was.
It keeps hope alive that you're
was-
moving in the
that
right
was-
direction.
That was what convinced people,
Yeah.
or was supposed to convince people, that there is a tendency towards greater transparency.
Yeah, it's the symbolic act rather than the content.
Obviously, you can only do that once or twice.
Yeah, that's the maximum. Yeah, sorry, somebody had a last question there, I think. The gentleman in the corner.
Actually, I don't have a question. I'm a student at NUS.
You
I
still
just
can ask a
want,
question.
yeah, I just want to add something on the IPO.
Yeah.
In terms of transparency, I think before 2 weeks they just released the data for the first half of this year.
What
Like
data?
for Aramco, like
Aramco.
what is their income, revenue for this half. And they compared it with last year, so I think they are moving towards that direction. Also, last 2 weeks there was news about asking for companies to pitch for the IPO release.
To what? For the IPO release?
Yeah, to pitch, like they are asking banks to pitch, like
Banks to okay,
to pitch for the
okay,
IPO.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Any last question? If not, thank you all for coming. Hope you come back for the other lectures.